Nancy Mancias. I am in the San Francisco Bay Area. And please, if you can share with us on Zoom and even on YouTube, where your first name and where you're at right now in the globe on the planet. Okay, great. My name is Nancy Mancias, and I am a campaign organizer with CODEPINK. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with CODEPINK, you can visit us at codepink.org. Today's webinar, Joe Biden's BlackRock Cabinet Picks, is live on Zoom and broadcasting on YouTube CODEPINK Action. Today, we will hear from our guest, Max Moran. Afterwards, we'll take questions from you and then wrap up with some action items. But let's get started with our guest speaker. Max Moran is a research assistant at the Revolving Door Project. He was previously a communications intern at Americans for Financial Reform and has interned for several journalism and international advocacy organizations. Max studied international relations and journalism at Brandeis University. Max's writings have appeared in numerous outlets. We'll share some links to Max's writings in the Zoom chat. Max, welcome. Before we get started on our topic today, can you tell us a little bit about the Revolving Door Project and what it does and what it hopes to accomplish, and how can people get involved? So you have the floor.
Sure. Thanks so much. And thanks everybody for tuning in. Obviously, there are a lot of things going on today, especially within US politics. So I appreciate you taking the time to learn a little bit about the Biden transition and the BlackRock picks therein, because it really is quite important. So a little bit of background about the Revolving Door Project. We are an organization based out of the Center for Economic and Policy Research in DC. Essentially, we try to scrutinize the executive branch of the federal government through a lens of personnel as policy. Basically, we look at the constellation of progressive advocacy organizations, progressive grassroots organizations, progressive think tanks, and so on. And we notice that there is a lot of extremely admirable work done to push important laws, important bills through the legislature, but there's not as much of an attention on a whole other branch of the government, that being the executive branch, where an extraordinary amount of actual governance is done in the 21st century. And also where you have this massive bureaucracy that's often very misunderstood because it's very complex, it's very sort of like piecemeal in some ways, but there are individuals who are appointed or who are nominated to jobs across the executive branch that wield tremendous amounts of power. And that also, this is how corporate America in particular, including BlackRock and Wall Street, as well as fossil fuel firms, big tech, and so on, it's largely through control of the executive branch and through getting their preferred people installed into various regulatory jobs, various secretary jobs, and so on. That's largely how they are able to influence policy and push it into the direction which they want. So we try to demystify and explain how the executive branch works, how the executive branch also is very often captured by corporate interests against the public interest, and try to push strategies and push understanding of this as a key way to take back our democracy. So that's a little bit about us. You can find us on Twitter at Revolving Door DC. You can find us on the web at therevolvingdoorproject.org. And glad to be here.
Thank you so much for that background on the Revolving Door Project. Max, you have written several pieces about Biden's picks, BlackRock picks into his cabinet. And all of us are here today to hear what you have to say about this, to better educate ourselves and be smarter about what's upcoming for the Biden administration and how BlackRock is playing into that. So we'd love to hear about his picks.
Sure. So it's a very important question. It's a very complex question as far as how the picks across the cabinet, and also just as importantly, the positions that aren't technically part of the cabinet, but that still wield a lot of influence, things like advisors, things like informal personnel, are able to influence Biden and potentially influence the policies that he would implement. So as far as BlackRock itself goes, it's important to first understand some of their stakes in this. BlackRock, of course, is the world's largest financial asset manager. They manage several trillions of dollars worldwide. Most of this is invested passively in companies across the board. Brian Deese, I'm going to talk about in a minute, once said very directly that, oh, we own the market across the board. Yes, these guys have extraordinary amounts of influence over the global economy. Notably, BlackRock is not a systemically important financial institution, at least in the eyes of the US government. That is a term that basically indicates whether something is considered too big to fail in the terms of like the too big to fail banks that are regulated as being crucial to the continuation of the global economy, global finance. BlackRock has basically, just through playing the lobbying game and also playing the internal personnel and influence game very, very well, has avoided being designated as a systemically important financial institution, despite the fact that it controls more overall assets than some other banks that actually have that designation. So keeping themselves under-regulated, especially in that way, is one of BlackRock's major goals. Like most of these big institutions, they have influence and they donate to people on both sides of the aisle. There was reporting the other day that BlackRock donated about $100,000 to some of the senators and congressmen who have refused to certify the election results, the thing which set off this entire second impeachment process. So, these are not guys who are like committed Democrats, who are certainly not committed progressives by any means. They're not committed Republicans either. They are people who are committed to whatever is going to maintain their own power. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, long aspired to be the Treasury Secretary. He was considered for the role under Barack Obama as well as Hillary Clinton. It seems unlikely that he's going to be able to actualize that dream at this point in his career. But he has for years been cultivating what's sort of called a shadow cabinet within BlackRock of basically well-regarded policy wonks, well-regarded political hands, people who are deep in Democratic Party politics, people who elected officials know and trust. Fink has been hiring these people and has been putting them in sort of very public-facing roles. People who don't really have necessarily much investment experience, much experience in the actual work of BlackRock. And these are people who are being hired because they have political influence. People who are being hired because they have political power, and because, as we're seeing right now, Fink can then try to get some of them installed in key jobs across a potential Democratic administration, which is what we're seeing right now. So getting into some of the specific names that have been put forward for various jobs at this point. Probably the most high-profile person, at least linked to BlackRock, the person with the most influence with Biden, at least linked to BlackRock, is someone who actually doesn't work for them. His name is Mike Donilon. He is Biden's top political advisor. He was one of the key advisors on Biden's campaign. He's the person who came up with the entire framing of Biden's campaign as being about restoring the soul of the country, the thing that was his entire campaign slogan, the framing that he invoked all this time. That was Mike Donilon. He has been in Biden's inner circle for a very long time. Now, Mike himself has never been employed by BlackRock, but his brother Tom, with whom he is very close, is the head of the BlackRock Investment Institute. This being essentially BlackRock's internal think tank. And Tom Donilon, the brother, was also the national security advisor to Barack Obama. So he was Barack Obama's one of his top, most important foreign policy staffers. He himself so far doesn't look like he's trying to get a job, but again, his brother is one of the most important people in Biden's ear as far as just pure political strategy, pure political consideration, one of his top advisors there. So that's important to know. As far as actual appointees, actual figures coming directly from BlackRock, the most high profile would be Brian Deese. He is the incoming National Economic Council director. So this is a little bit technical here. The National Economic Council is sort of like a group huddle session of all of the top economic policymakers to figure out how they're going to implement Biden's agenda. So it's basically where you have the Treasury Secretary, the Labor Secretary, Commerce Secretary, and so on, everyone whose job is about domestic economic policy. They all get in a room together and they all hash out, okay, what's our plan for actually following through on all of these promises that we've made on the campaign trail. The National Economic Council director both provides research to help them with that and also just sort of like helps to corral and organize that conversation. And that's what Brian Deese's role is going to be. So Brian Deese is coming directly from essentially working as BlackRock's person to deflect criticism on their environmental record. If you're on this call, you might be familiar with the BlackRock's Big Problem campaign, which is all about drawing attention to the fact that, again, they're this massive owner of companies, massive owner of financial capital. They're also thus the largest owner of fossil fuel companies in the world. They don't directly own companies, but they have massive stakes in everything from Saudi Aramco to Shell Oil and so on. Brian Deese's job has been essentially well, on paper, what he's been doing is essentially to look through BlackRock's various investment products with which people can try to purchase this product, get involved with it, and disclose to investors more the potential climate impacts of this investment. This does not mean that he is getting BlackRock to stop owning fossil fuel companies. He is just trying to say, we'll let the consumer decide this, essentially. If the consumer decides that they want to invest in fossil fuel companies, we'll have that option for them. If they decide they want to invest more greenly, we'll have that option for them. But we ourselves are certainly going to continue our ownership across the board. Now, diese came to that role because he was one of the main organizers of the Paris Climate Accords. He was one of Barack Obama's main negotiators, main organizers there. He had sort of an interesting career across the Obama years. He helped to do some work on the auto bailouts in the early years. He's moved across a bunch of different issue areas, and he sort of ended up on climate policy, sort of like at the end of this whole run. But essentially, BlackRock took the guy who played a big part in organizing the Paris Accords and said, "Okay, you're in charge of our greenwashing efforts." And Brian Deese said, "Great." I should note here that as far as the nominees for actually leading different financial regulatory agencies, again, we're still very early on in the process, but so far it looks pretty good. You had Gary Gensler announced as most likely to pick for the Securities and Exchange Council the other day. Gary Gensler he was one of the regulators who was just the most furious of anyone at the big banks after 2008. He's very, very smart. He is very willing to prosecute, to go after bad action. We have every reason to predict that he will be excellent on climate issues as well. Obviously, there are big questions that he will have to answer about his specific plans for implementing climate issues from the SEC. But I don't want it to seem like it's all doom and gloom here. There are actually significant wins and significantly good things that that one can see and portend from the Biden folks, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on. But yeah, so that's Brian Deese. Also,
can I just
go ahead, please.
So let's just stay on Brian Deese for a little bit. Quite a controversial pick, not only just in the Biden campaign, but also for activists. You have some well-known activists who have stepped up and said, you know, Brian Deese, he's a nice guy. You know, we need to kind of give him a chance, and maybe he's a potential for somebody to work with in the Biden administration. I mean, what do you have to say about that as this nice guy in the Biden administration? You said earlier that these folks are committed to their own power, yet you have some of the most well-known environmental activists who are saying, no, you know, he's a nice guy. What do we have to do? What are we going to do about these nice guys in Biden's administration?
So I'm glad that you mentioned that. If you're unfamiliar, Bill McKibbin, who is the leader of 350.org, absolutely incredible human being. He posted a long Twitter thread after after Brian Deese was announced, basically talking about the fact that he has a very good personal relationship with Deese. It's worth noting that that relationship did not originate. They didn't originally meet through their respective work. They happen to know each other through their spouses. McKibbin's thread also sort of talks about that, like, you know, he's basically conflicted on this issue in sort of a way that he can't really look at Deese in sort of a neutral sense. But to the broader point there about the fact that, like, by all accounts, Brian Deese is personally a very nice person. I have no doubt that he is interpersonally a very nice guy. Frankly, that's not the most important thing with when someone is being vested with the power of the state, was being vested with the power of United States economic policy, whether or not you are personally a nice guy. What matters more is what particular policies you are going to pursue, is who and how got you that job, or how you got that job and who got you it, excuse my grammar. And thus sort of who you sort of feel indebted to. Like, you know, I'm not saying that there's a vast conspiracy that all people who come from BlackRock are secretly trying to make Larry Fink the secret head of the universe. By no means. That is not even remotely what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say is that if your understanding of economic issues is informed by your time at BlackRock, if your understanding of climate issues is informed by your time at BlackRock and by the specific policies that you try to pursue, like within there, you're going to carry that into the White House. That's going to inform how you think about these things. And it's going to, for one thing, foreclose on certain other policies that you might have looked at if you came from a more independent perspective, if you came from a perspective that wasn't about personal profit seeking. And for another, you know, if you went from the Obama White House out to this multi-trillion-dollar company and then back into the Biden White House, that speaks to some of your own personal priorities, which include largely getting rich. And it is kind of hard to both want to get rich and want to seriously deal with a climate crisis, not to mention inequality, not to mention war, not to mention all of the other massive issues that we have that are interlinked with our economic systems. So, again, I have every reason to believe that Brian Deese is a nice guy and that he is acting in good faith. I just think that if Biden wanted to look at these issues from a more independent perspective, from a perspective that isn't coming at things from a market-based view, a market-based lens, that would inform some other policies that I think might be more effective or that might signal a new and necessary approach.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. That being said, so other two figures I want to talk briefly about are Mike Pyle, who is going to be Kamala Harris's chief economist. It's worth mentioning that Mike Pyle is not actually trained as an economist; he's a lawyer. But Pyle is one of sort of the original members of the shadow cabinet that I mentioned earlier that Fink has assembled over time. He had worked in the Obama White House first under Peter Orszag, who was Obama's first budget director, also one of the main architects of like the austerity measures very early on within the Obama tenure, one of like the driving forces behind putting balanced budgets ahead of digging out of the Great Recession. And from there, he went to work for Lael Brainerd on trade issues, Brainerd being one of the key architects of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So both of these are sort of like, he's worked for individuals who are linked to things that I think a lot of progressives would object to. It's a little bit harder to pin down exactly where he sort of falls on things, or if he's sort of looked at some of those policies and said, you know what, I think I regret my time doing that. I think that maybe I was looking at this in the wrong way. These are things that I would hope to get answers from him about at some point, as far as just what his general economic philosophies are. But that gets to another point, which is that all of the individuals I've mentioned so far, all of them are going into appointive positions. They're not going into Senate confirmed positions. They're not going into positions where they would be like, sitting down in front of a panel to answer questions, to try to tease out a little bit about who this person is. These are all jobs that essentially were created by the president, or in this case, the vice president, to say, I want an advisor who's going to help me out on XYZ thing. And just like that, you have a job. This is an important distinction, an important thing to know about the executive branch, that there are often a lot of very powerful jobs that don't have formal policy-making power, but they shape the rooms in which formal policies are created, like the NEC director, or they advise people who have direct policy-making power, like Mike Pyle does as the chief economist to the vice president. So that's, again, an important sort of nuance for trying to understand exactly how this really complicated executive branch works. The one BlackRock figure who is going to be put into a Senate confirmed position is Adewale Adeyemo, who was, again, an Obama aide. He's going to become the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. By all accounts, he has a lot of figures who actually support him deeply, Elizabeth Warren and others. He played a major role in setting up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. He worked for a couple of years at BlackRock and then went to go run Obama's nonprofit. It's worth noting that because, again, he's in a Senate confirmed position, he has recently released his financial disclosure documents, in which he basically lays out what his plans are for avoiding conflicts of interest given his past work for BlackRock. And his plan is basically, he says, I'm going to sell my personal shares in BlackRock, and until I do that, I am not going to work on anything that's related to BlackRock. Okay, this isn't really getting at the heart of the issue. It's like, okay, you're not going to personally be benefiting, like financially, that is, from BlackRock while you're there, but you're still going to be working, for one thing, largely you're going to often be working with other figures who still work for BlackRock, and for another thing, again, BlackRock is this multi-trillion-dollar asset manager that has massive stakes in basically every part of the global economy. It's kind of hard to really fully separate out all of that from running an economic policy position, because I mean, if you really just didn't want to have a person who's worked at BlackRock work on things that BlackRock has a stake in, they basically just can't work on economic policy, which to me at least suggests that maybe we just shouldn't hire BlackRock people, and that way we can have a more independent voice leading our country and leading our economic policies. But this is the situation that we find ourselves in. So I just want to close this by pointing out that when Biden is hiring these people, he isn't looking at them as XYZ person from BlackRock, and again, I'm part of the secret conspiracy to have BlackRock rule the world or anything like that. He isn't looking at this as the guy who's coming from this firm. He's looking at this as a guy who he worked with in the Obama administration and an old friend of his. Biden is someone who cares very deeply about the people who are inside of his circle, about the people who he's worked with for many years, who he has trust in. And he doesn't really sort of see their past connections or where they've gone to work in order to become rich as sort of material to who this person is. That's sort of the challenge with helping him to understand this and helping people to sort of try to make policy with an awareness that you are giving a significant amount of government power to people who come from a background that's all about, manipulating and controlling significant amounts of power. So.
Great. Thank you so much for that background and overview of Biden's BlackRock appointees. And I just wanted to maybe see if you had anything to say about Larry Fink and his shadow cabinet and his history in austerity politics and the climate implications of BlackRock. If there's anything that you would like to add around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, Larry Fink, like I mentioned, has for a long time wanted to become the Treasury Secretary, Fink being the CEO of BlackRock. He also was one of the original members of Fix the Debt in 2010, that being the big confab of CEOs who were all about trying to balance the budget rather than really address the Great Recession. He's continued to be a major pusher for balancing budgets, in some ways over other economic policy goals. And again, like I said, BlackRock was and remains the largest holder of fossil fuels in the world. Larry Fink claims to care a great deal about environmental issues, but again, his company buys up and finances the polluters of the planet. So vesting a lot of power in if a lot of power is going to be granted to Fink, if if Fink's opinion is going to carry a lot of sway within the next White House, that portends a very dangerous policy for anyone who cares about the planet and anyone who cares about economic equality. That being said, what we've heard so far from Biden has been that he's starting to see these things in a different direction. His administration has come out and said that they fully recognize the need for further deficit spending as we're in the middle of this coronavirus depression. And you have figures like Deb Haaland, who is probably the biggest win for progressives in the Biden cabinet, who is going to be the Secretary of Interior, fantastic climate warrior, supporter of the Green New Deal. And environmental policy advocates have really seen a lot of major wins in terms of helping Biden to sort of bring him over to their perspective. He's certainly not a Green New Deal warrior by any stretch of the imagination, but he's starting to really understand both the stakes and the real opportunities therein. I don't want to say one way or the other definitively that Larry Fink is going to have an enormous amount of sway over Biden. I think that Biden is someone who deeply likes to listen to lots of different perspectives, and he sees himself very much as a broker between different groups. If you look at his career across politics, he basically just always picks wherever the exact middle of the Democratic Party is, and he just sticks his flag down there because he thinks that that's the safest place to be. And the exact middle of the Democratic Party has shifted dramatically to the left since the Obama years. So again, I really think that there's a lot of questions up in the air about this. It's hard to make any kind of definitive judgments. But just Fink is a figure that it is worth paying attention to if you care about any of these issues.
Okay, great. And I just want to turn my attention to our audience, our participants. And if you have any questions for Max, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Or there's also a Q&A section on the bottom of your nav bar. You can add your questions there. Oh, I do have a question here. It's about Larry Fink's relationship with the Saudi Crown Prince and I guess his Middle East BlackRock policy, and someone mostly concerned about the ongoing war in Yemen. Do you have any thoughts around that relationship?
Yeah, that's a very troubling relationship. I by no means claim expertise on Saudi Arabia policy or on Yemen policy. Again, a lot of my focus is more on domestic economics. But Fink and BlackRock have a very close relationship with Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. Shortly after the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post journalist, you might remember that there was going to be this this big confab with a bunch of CEOs, a bunch of Wall Street folks talking about the incredible investment opportunities in Saudi Arabia and working closely therein. And a lot of CEOs, a lot of Wall Street folks actually, at least temporarily, chose not to participate in that because basically because of the optics of palling around with a guy who had just, authorized an assassination. If I remember correctly, Fink didn't go to that one, but he did go to the next one, basically. I know that BlackRock has, or is at least seeking, a major stake in Saudi Aramco, that being the Saudi Arabian national oil company. Again, they're the largest investor in fossil fuels. Makes sense. Saudi Aramco is a very, very big fossil fuel company. But they have underwritten and have supported and really looked the other way about Saudi Arabian policies, including the war in Yemen. So, we should hope deeply that an incoming Biden State Department and incoming Biden foreign policy team is not going to want to associate with the Saudis again after this killing, after the war in Yemen, and so on. We'll have to see if oil money wins out. The history of U.S. foreign policy does not inspire confidence on this front. But again, it is a connection that is worth noting in order to understand what BlackRock is and what some of its stakes are.
Great, thank you for answering that question. And I just want to add to onto that there is a day of action to stop the war in Yemen on January 25th. I hope I'm saying that date right. And there are caravans being organized, and one of the stops along some of the caravans is at the BlackRock offices. Let's go ahead and move on to some other questions that have come in. Okay, so how to force the military-industrial corporate relationship to take responsibility for the environmental damage they create and this impact on global warming, let alone the human misery created by endless war policies. It's a bit of a widespread question coming in, and not sure if that's something that we could answer. It's an ongoing question of militarism and its influence on environmental damage. Do you have any thoughts around that?
Lord, I wish I had a succinct, clean answer on that. Like, my God, do I wish I had a good answer on that. I'll say this. Biden has made clear that a big part of his plan for getting out of the coronavirus recession, coronavirus depression, involves contracting services, involves the government's capacity as this massive spender, this massive stimulator of the private sector through federal contracting. as federal contractors go, the Pentagon is the largest. Biden has also, again, made glances to and like tiptoed toward statements around mandating that these contracts and these contracting statements follow certain green capacities, follow certain just transition principles, working closely with labor and with unions in order to ensure that, for one thing, like, government contracting jobs are good, honest jobs, and also, like, starting to assess and take into account the climate impacts therein. It would follow that to put these two principles together, Biden would care deeply about at least making sure that green contracting is a major principle in his federal contracting as far as the Pentagon goes. Now, that is one tiny, tiny piece of the much broader problem of the military-industrial complex. That is one tiny, tiny piece of the much broader problem of militarism and how militarism is tied into, global conflict. So, I am by no means an expert on those fields, and by no means claim to have the magic perfect, lock and key in order to fix those, fix all of that. I would say that, one of the major pushes on financial policy as well is going to be on green climate finance. It's going to be on basically trying to promulgate regulations to have banks and to have financial actors consider climate to be a systemic risk, climate change that is, to be a systemic risk to the financial system, and thus to promulgate regulations to force action on that, to force banks to stop investing in the fossil fuel industry. Just as we can put out regulations and put out rules to consider climate as a risk in that sense, and to consider climate as something which requires regulatory and government action for financial stability, we should be able to do the same on foreign policy, on statecraft, on military policy, and so on. Again, I'm not the right guy to turn to as far as like demystifying the Pentagon and its inner workings, and certainly about undoing the military-industrial complex. Again, I wish to God that I had a clearer answer about that. But these are some principles to be thinking about.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Another question that came in is, so you laid out who these BlackRock picks are. Folks are concerned. What can they do to influence Biden to change or reconsider his cabinet picks? Is it a done deal? It sounds like it is. Is there some influence? And then I also have a follow-up question to that on the piece that came out about the two BlackRock picks who had recused themselves. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So is it a done deal or not? In some ways it is, and in some ways it isn't. I'd say that the names which Biden has already put forward, he is not going to want to back out from. That would be a massive loss in political capital on his part, to very publicly back away from people that in some cases had to very publicly defend. And he's not going to want to do that going into the start of his administration. That being said, these are certainly not the only members of the BlackRock shadow cabinet, and they're certainly not the only people that Fink and so on wants to install across the federal government. We can make it clear, and many groups have been very heroically leading the charge on this, make it clear that we do not want BlackRock to plant its seeds all across the federal government. We want to see independent, public-minded individuals leading different parts of the federal government. There's over 4,000 positions which an incoming administration has to fill. BlackRock, yes. It's a whole separate issue that the American government has far, far, far too many political appointees in the first place. But we can make it clear that this is not the path to, for one thing, uniting this very broad coalition that elected him, and for another thing, to meeting the very real challenges that are in front of him. Like I said, Biden plants his seed firmly, plants his flag firmly in wherever the center of the Democratic Party happens to be at a given moment. The center of the Democratic Party is a difficult thing to tease out because, again, figures like Larry Fink consider themselves to be good Democrats who, make their massive campaign contributions, but they're to Democrats. But it also includes progressives. It also includes individuals who want freedom from corporate power. And these figures are very much ascendant. These figures are very much the ones who inspire the base, who are the ones who people are rallying behind, making it clear to Biden that his success and that the success of the Democratic Party once he's gone, because he obviously sees himself as a transitional figure, hinges on freedom from these figures, that we are living in a populist moment that is not going to go away. And so you need to own that. There is a lot of power in that, and that can be done.
I'm seeing a lot of chats coming in about folks. Another one that they're just concerned, just a real deep concern about these picks in Biden's cabinet. And we have another one who, it's more of a comment, not a question, but I'd like to share it with you and the rest of the audience. Is you covered the Donnellan brothers, and this person is concerned about their temptation for insider trading. Is that even something that we should be concerned about?
I mean, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not aware of insider trading concerns specifically with Donnellans, but I may just be uninformed on that front. I obviously do your research. I might just not be aware of that. I think in a, to take a step back from the legal definition of insider trading, as far as insider dealing, as far as using the awareness of your government knowledge in order to profit in the private sector, that's absolutely something which we should be worried about. That's a concern which extends beyond BlackRock. It also extends to the consulting industry. If you've been following Anthony Blinken, who is the nominee for Secretary of State, his consulting company, West Exec Advisors, is basically shaping up to be the State Department. Blinken was a longtime political aide on foreign policy issues. After the Obama administration, he and several other folks formed a company called West Exec Advisors, where essentially they have consulted for the largest corporations in the world about how to basically handle international policy, because they're the people that set international policy. Many of these same people are also involved in a private equity firm, which pretty openly advertised, look, our people are going to be the next State Department, invest with us, and we will make sure that you implement policies that will favor your company. Again, I don't know about specific, the legal definition of insider trading, and specifically around the Donnellans, but as far as insiders cashing in on their insider knowledge, that is absolutely a concern that we should have about this incoming administration, and that's what the Revolving Door Project is all about.
Great. Well, it looks like we don't have any further questions, but I just want to acknowledge the folks who are joining us from outside the US. And if you have anything that you would like to share with them, we're talking about more internally, what's happening in Washington, D.C. with the Biden administration, anything that folks outside of the US or international audience and partners should be concerned about. Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you on my end.
Oh, okay. Is there anything that you'd like to share with them?
Yeah. I'm sorry about that. I thought you were asking them. I was a little confused for a second.
Sorry.
No worries. That's fine. I misunderstood. I would say that I don't have to tell our international audience here that U.S. policy affects them. They are all too aware of that, I'm sure. I don't have to tell them that U.S. global financial firms affect them and affect their local economies and so on. I think that it's worth noting that there's going to be a major focus within the State Department as well as within Treasury and other sort of like economic foreign policy types of folks about trying to rebuild a certain amount of global authority in the coming years that has been ceded under the Trump administration, just due to the Trump administration's horrors. We'll see how that goes in a macro sense, but in a micro sense, like, within, your own advocacy in your own countries, it's, you can say and you can make it clear that, if the Americans want to prove to us that they are going to be good faith actors, they can start by rejecting the impact and rejecting the influence of firms like BlackRock. And they can start by, trying to listen to us about what we actually need from them in terms of things like international aid or, international economic policy making, rather than defaulting to, whatever international trade policies and so on, a BlackRock or so on looks at. And Biden cares deeply about and has made clear that he cares about working on trade issues with a lens toward workers, with a lens toward rewriting some of the global trade regime. We'll see how much he can do about that within 4 years. But he's made it clear that he is starting to see the impacts of a largely corporate-driven global trade regime, and how that leads to inequality, bifurcation, and so on. Reinforcing that impulse of his through your own activism and through your own interactions with your own countries and leadership, I think would be a very positive thing.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up, but do you have any final words or anything you'd like to share with us?
Just again, like, hold out hope and keep on fighting. Again, it is really not all doom and gloom. This is like, this is seriously going significantly better than it did under Barack Obama. It is not where we need it to be as a planet right now, but it is going better. And also just stay engaged. And again, please try to understand some of these bureaucracies and these nuances and these complex inner workings of the executive branch. It's through that very deep layer of complexity that a lot of insiders are able to dismiss the grassroots, are able to say, well, these people just don't know what they're talking about because they've never heard of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs and so on. The more that you can do to say, no, I actually do know this, and I know that you're full of crap about that, the more you're going to be listened to.
Great. Thank you so much. So I just want to thank our guests, Max Moran, for being here with the Revolving Door Project. You can go to the revolvingdoorproject.org, and I'd like to send you all off with some action items. And starting off with our partners at Amazon Watch. They have Association of Brazilian Indigenous Peoples sent an open letter to BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, calling on the asset management firm to adopt a comprehensive forest and indigenous rights policy. You can go to amazonwatch.org to learn more about that. Also, you can go to our CODEPINK website. We have a petition that says, "Don't let BlackRock run the White House." You can sign on to that as well. Also, Majority Action. I think you talked a little bit about this, Max. In their new analysis, BlackRock denounced the Capitol coup, but donated $85K to 15 insurrectionist enablers in Congress, and shield major companies from accountability on their dark money donations. You can go to Majority Action to learn about that. And also our friends in Europe, Reclaim Finance and Urgwald, released a new report about BlackRock's high-level support for the coal industry. You can go to reclaimfinance.org to learn more about that. And finally, you did mention our friends at BlackRock's Big Problem. They just launched a brand new website today, new and improved site, did the day before the 1-year anniversary of BlackRock's 2020 climate commitment. So this comes a day ahead of Larry Fink's annual letter that he will release to the financial world. and usually is a very big influence on the financial sector. So if you go to blackrocksbigproblem.com, you can check out the new website. And that's the end of our webinar today. I'd like to thank Max and you all for joining us today. And thank you and goodbye.
Thanks so much.